We're going to just open up with the reading of John chapter 2 and the first 12 verses this morning as we look at the wedding at Cana. John chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. And the third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus was called and his disciples to the marriage. And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus said unto him, They have no wine. And Jesus said unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. His mother said unto the servants, Whatsoever he saith unto you, do it. And there were set there 6 water pots of stone, after the manner of purifying of the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. And Jesus said unto them, Fill the water pots with water. And they filled them up to the brim. And he said unto them, Draw out now, and bear unto the governor of the feast. And they bore it. And when the ruler of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and knew not whence it was, but the servants which drew the water knew, the governor of the feast called the bridegroom. And he said unto him, Every man at the beginning doth set forth good wine, and when men be well drunk, then that which is worse, but thou hast kept the good wine until now. And this is the beginning of miracles that Jesus in Cana of did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested forth his glory, and his disciples believed on him. And after this, he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brother and his disciples, and they continued there not many days. And there you may be seated. We open up here at a very familiar account to us all. The last time, as we analyzed the end of chapter 1 and the calling of Peter, of Andrew, Nathaniel, and Philip, we also established a timeline and a time frame which these events here in the first couple chapters of John take place. And if you recall, we established that these are things that took place really in between the temptation of Christ in the wilderness and the arrest of John and the calling again of Peter and Andrew and a couple other disciples there in the Sea of Galilee. All right, so John really is filling in that blank of time, and we get a sort of jump cut in the other Gospels. Here we get a little bit more detail. And this is one of the things that happened before John the Baptist was thrown into prison. So Jesus and his disciples, those followers that he called there at the end of chapter 1, had made their way about 80 miles to the north from where they were at there, the Jordan River, to the little town of Cana. And it's just a little blip on the map, about 9 miles north of Nazareth. So it's within the local neighborhood where Jesus had grown up, where he was raised. We read also that Andrew and Peter were from this same general area. They were from a town a little bit closer to the Sea of Galilee, but they were all familiar with this area. And of course, we understand that within a certain local area, you're going to get to know the people that live there. Right? These were families that were well established in the area. They had likely made friends and familial connections and such. And so it was that Jesus was invited to this wedding. And we find that Mary had even a position of authority in this wedding. But we'll talk a little bit about that later. This is a very familiar account to us, although it's also one that we often just read. Right? We read about how Christ turned the water into wine. That's great. Let's get to John 3. All right, let's move on. And it doesn't really have a lot of impact to us. We tend not to understand exactly what is going on here. And the reason why we are taking this selection and not just browsing over it very quickly to move on to other things is because there is a lot that is going on here, as we will find today. But we're going to ask this morning in this message the primary question of what exactly did Jesus mean when he told his mother that his hour was not yet come? And what does this have to do with the provision of wine? Now, for us, in our American understanding of a wedding, we see it as a one-day affair. right? You get the invitations a few months before. The bride, the groom establish the day, they establish the venue. You assume there's going to be food, there's going to be dancing, there's going to be presents, there's going to be cake, and you go to the wedding, and then you enjoy the party for a few hours. You see the ceremony, and then you go home. Well, in the time of Christ, in these Jewish weddings, they were a much longer affair. We find over in Judges, as I skip ahead a little bit in my notes, Judges chapter 14, in verse 10 through 12, the marriage of Samson, this is recorded. I'll read it for you. It says, "And his father went down to the woman, and Samson made there a banquet for 7 days, so the young men had used to do. And it came to pass when they saw him that they took 30 guests, and they were with him. And Samson said unto them, I propound you a riddle. If you will indeed tell it to me, and discover it within the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 sheets and 30 changes of raiment." Here we find that the wedding feast of Samson was 7 days long. We find other places, apocryphal works, other historical literature, where it's recorded that Jewish weddings could even expand to 2 weeks, depending on the amount of wealth of the family, things like that. But you figure people are walking a very long ways, they're traveling a long way with their kids. This is going to be a family affair. It's going to be a time of celebration, of reunion, the union of two houses as they're wed. Of course, family members have to get to know each other. So these weddings would take place over a great deal of time. Now, I mentioned earlier that we may distract ourselves in a week or two to look at a certain phrase, and that is the third day. The third day is something that holds very deep importance within the scriptures. Quite frankly, I think it deserves its own focus, but we find here, chapter 2, it's introducing us to this third day. Now, whether this is the third day that Christ had come to Galilee, right, and giving us that timeline. Christ travels up to Galilee, the third day he's there. Him and his disciples are called to this wedding. Or it's the third day of this wedding that they're called to. Either way, the third day is important. It is significant to us. We find that it is a time when God really does very important things. I call your attention over to Exodus chapter 19, verse 10 through 16. Since we're talking about the third day, since we're talking about weddings, I bring you to this very familiar passage to us. Familiar because we go there a lot. Exodus chapter 19, beginning in verse 10. It says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Go unto the people, and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready against the third day. For the third day will the Lord come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And thou shalt set bounds unto the people round about, saying, Take heed to yourselves that ye go up not to the mount, or touch the border of it. Whosoever touches the mount shall surely be put to death. There shall not a hand touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through, whether it be beast or man, and it shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come up to the mount. And Moses went down from the mount unto the people, and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, Be ready against the third day. Come not at your wives. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceedingly loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled." Here we find this imagery of the third day of the people of Israel were gathered at Mount Sinai, that the Lord came down to affirm this marriage to them in this wedding ceremony. There was a feast, that there was vows that were taken there at that time. So I don't think it's any accident that this is established here in John as happening on the third day. There's deep significance here to the time when Jesus and his disciples came to this wedding, and he performed this miracle. What does this have to do with him providing the wine? Right? What does this have to do with our question? I read for you verse 4 specifically out of the ESV. So I think it gives us a little bit clearer picture, a little bit better idea and understanding in our language what exactly is being said by Christ here. And it says, Jesus said unto her, Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour is not yet come. Right? Why are you asking me to do something about this issue, there not being any wine? Now, we find in the Jewish weddings that the expectation for provision was on the bridegroom, right? The bridegroom was the one that was expected to give the provision of wine, of food, set up the feast. It was his family that would host the event. We see that there even in Judges that we had read a little while ago, where Samson is the one that made the banquet. Samson is the one that furnished the table, and it was the groom's house that the bride would go to, where they would be joined together, where they would dwell together. It was under the groom's provision. So in a lot of ways, the providing for this feast was a groom's display of his ability to provide for the bride, to provide for his own family, right? The groom took all of his provisions. He made them available for this feast. One of the things that was expected was the provision of wine. Well, I should establish that this is not going to be a commentary on alcohol use. We are going to look at some scriptures which speak about wine in a very positive light, because the scriptures do speak about that. And also, for our understanding, wine was very important in the Jewish culture. It symbolized a lot of things. It symbolized the provision of God. It symbolized joy. It symbolized blood. And really, one parallel that we can draw here, something that really struck me this time in studying this, was a parallel between the plague of Moses and him turning the water into blood, and Christ turning water into wine. One was a representation of God's judgment. One was a representation of God's wrath, or the other is a representation of God's provision, fruitfulness, and joy. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And we find here that Christ, really, as he was being asked to do something about this issue of wine, he was being asked to take the place of responsibility that was normally assumed by the bridegroom. Christ wasn't the bridegroom, yet he was being asked to take this responsibility by his mother. His mother was somehow involved in this wedding, and the delegation of, we see that in her delegation of servants, her authority over them, right? Not any person could just command the servants to go about and do things for a wedding, right? You wouldn't expect just a regular guest at your own wedding to start commanding the waiting staff around. She had a place where she could bring this up. She had a place where she could realize that this was going to be an issue before it actually became a major issue. The guests want wine. There isn't any. What are we going to do about it? Christ's answer was, why is this pertinent to me? Why are you asking me? My hour is not yet come. Right? Christ is not involved in the wedding in any capacity except being a guest there. The hour is not yet come. Now, for us who often read over this passage, we miss by that. Why is Christ saying that his hour isn't yet come? Is it just his time to perform miracles? Is there something more going on here? Turn the page there in my notes. Really, to discover the answer to this question, we're going to look at some Old Testament passages. As I would submit to you, Christ isn't just saying that it's not time for him to start performing miracles. In fact, he did that when he talked to Nathanael and he said, I saw you sitting under the fig tree, right? Displaying this miraculous knowledge in Nathanael when one was around. Or at least that's what we assume by the text. First, let's turn over to Amos. Amos chapter 9, verse 13 through 15. This is answering the question of why did Christ say that his hour was not yet come? All right, Amos chapter 9, verse 13 through 15. It says, Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him that sows seed. And the mountains shall drop sweet wine, and all the hills shall melt. And I will bring again the captivity of my people Israel, and they shall build with the waste cities and inhabit them. And they shall plant vineyards and drink the wine thereof. And they shall also make gardens and eat the fruit of them. And I will plant them upon their land, and they shall no more be pulled up out of their land, which I have given them, saith the Lord thy God. Now, Amos chapter 9, if you recall, for those of you who attended our Wednesday night studies, we find that this declaration of blessing comes after a very lengthy declaration of judgment upon Israel, upon the surrounding nations, upon Judah itself, and God is promising the restoration of Israel to the land, and he's promising plenty. He's promising to make them make their crops very fruitful, give them an abundance of wheat, an abundance of wine. That's the thing that we want to be focusing on here, this abundance of wine. Isaiah chapter 25. Let's turn there. We'll begin in verse 6 here. Isaiah chapter 25, verse 6. And I read this to you from the NASB. It reads, Now the Lord of armies will prepare a lavish banquet for all the peoples on this mountain, a banquet of aged wine, choice pieces with marrow, and refined aged wine. And on this mountain he will destroy the covering which is over all peoples, the veil which is stretched over all nations. He will swallow up death for all time, and the Lord God will wipe tears away from all faces. And he will remove the disgrace of his people from all the earth. For the Lord has spoken, and it will be said on that day, Behold, this is our God, for whom we have waited, that he might save us. This is the Lord for whom we have waited. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation. We see here in this promise of restoration, in this promise of the Lord establishing Israel as a kingdom, there is a lavish banquet with wine, with choice pieces of meat and marrow, refined aged wine, right? Real fine wines. And this is in direct contrast to something that we read in Isaiah 28. This is also something that ought to be brought up. So let's turn over the page or two to Isaiah chapter 28, beginning in verse 1. It says, Woe to the crown of pride, to the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is a fading flower, which are on the head of the fat valleys, of them that are overcome with wine. Behold, the Lord has a mighty and strong one, which as a tempest to hail and a destroying storm, as a flood of mighty waters overflowing, shall cast down to the earth with the hand. The crown of pride, the drunkards of Ephraim, shall be trodden under feet. And the glorious beauty which is on the head of the fat valley shall be a fading flower, and as a hasty fruit before the summer, which when he that looks upon it seeth, while it is yet in his hand, he eateth it up. In that day shall the Lord of hosts be for a crown of glory, for a diadem of beauty unto the residue of his people, and for a spirit of judgment to him that sits in judgment, and for strength to them that turns the battle to the gate. But they also have erred through wine and through strong drink are out of the way. The priest and the prophet have erred through strong drink. They are swallowed up of wine, They're out of the way through strong drink. They err in vision. They stumble in judgment. For all tables are full of vomit and filthiness, so that there is no place clean. And I said before, this isn't going to be a commentary on alcohol or its use, but I do want to point out to you here that in one chapter, in chapter 25, we read about how this banquet of wine uh, is meant to be a blessing. It's meant to display the return of Christ, Him finally on His throne. And we find this contrasted by Israel giving themselves over to drunkenness. In one, we have the celebration of marriage between God and His bride. In the other, we have a declaration of judgment of those who have just been recklessly partaking, have been sinning against the Lord, have been not taking the time that they've been given seriously. They've been wasting it away with revelings and parties. Right? So there's this contrast between righteous celebration and unrighteous celebration. A time of feasting when it's appropriate, and a time of excess. A time when there is this condemnable use. But we find that in the chapter that or in the section of scripture that we read in John chapter 2, this celebration of this wedding, this was an appropriate time of celebration. So we read about these Old Testament scriptures, and I have a couple of more here that we'll read shortly. But we read about these declarations of the return of God, the establishment of His kingdom, the establishment of His rulership, a wedding between Himself and His people. And we see the celebration, this drinking of wine. Right? We find that the abundance of wine is something that is given as a matter of joy and a matter of celebration. We find that as Christ performs this miracle here, He is giving them a taste of what this future kingdom will be like. Now, in order to understand that fully, we have to understand the vessels that were filled up. I believe it's the ESV where it's told there in John chapter 2, and I'm just going to turn back there, even though I'm in Isaiah here. You can see here what word is used. I don't remember it. Yeah, firkin. That doesn't mean anything to us, right? What's a firkin? Sounds like some sort of fuzzy little toy that you would buy from the store and sit on your shelf and wiggle its ears at you or something. No, that's a Furby. Terrifying creatures. The ESV translates it to about 20 or 30 gallons of cheese. The word used there that is translated as firkin or gallons is really a volume, a measurement that's a little bit less than, I believe, 20 or 30 gallons, like 17 to 27, within that range. But rounding up, these 6 water pots of stone, each containing 20 or 30 gallons, that quick math, it's a lot. It's 120 to 100. Help me out here. 6 times 3, 180. 120 to 180 gallons of wine, right? That Christ just produces here. That's a lot. That's a couple bathtubs full. There's an abundance of wine being produced here, right? Christ's time had not yet come. And yet here He's giving them this picture of abundance in Him being. Well, let's read a couple more passages in the Old Testament, just to make sure that we get the idea. Jeremiah chapter 31. I have all these written here in my notes. I'll just read them for you here. Jeremiah chapter 31, beginning of verse 12. Going through 14, it reads, Therefore shall they come and sing in the height of Zion, and shall flow together to the goodness of the Lord for wheat and for wine and for oil, for the young of the flock and for the herd, and their soul shall be as a watered garden, and they shall not sorrow any more at all. Then shall the virgin rejoice and dance, both young men and old together, for I will turn their mourning into joy, and will comfort them, and will make them rejoice from their sorrow. And I will satiate the soul of the priests with fatness, and my people will be satisfied with my goodness, saith the Lord. We find here this promise that in the new covenant that God establishes with Israel, there will be this abundance, there will be this plenty. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 12 and 13, it reads, Wherefore it shall come to pass, if you hearken to these judgments and keep and do them, that the Lord thy God shall keep unto thee the covenant and the mercy which he swore as thy fathers, and he will love thee and bless thee and multiply thee. He will also bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of thy land, thy corn, thy wine, and thy oil, the increase of thy kind, and the flocks of thy sheep, in the land which he swore unto thy fathers to give thee. We see here that an indication that Israel is being obedient to the Lord and is being blessed by him is this overabundance of children, of crops, of their flocks, and of wine. We find even as far back as Genesis chapter 27, as Isaac blesses Jacob. I read for you verse 28 and 29. Genesis chapter 27, verse 28 and 29. It says, Therefore God give thee of the dew of heaven, the fatness of earth, and the plenty of corn and wine. Let the people serve thee, and the nations bow down to thee. Be Lord of thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be every one who curses thee, and blessed be he who blesses thee. We find here that Isaac's blessing upon his son, his declaration of this inheritance, the birthright inheritance that Jacob had gotten, was this blessing of abundance. We find that promise to the firstborn sons. We find that promise to God's people, to his bride, to Israel, to that nation. We find that promise to given to ourselves. While we don't reap the full benefits of this promise in this life, we do look forward to an eternity enjoying the abundance and blessing of the Lord. As Christ was performing this miracle, this conversation that he had with his mother, where his mother said, They're out of wine. Please do something about this. She was coming to Christ on behalf of the bridegroom, who would have been seen as failing his obligations in his inability to provide this drink for the people during this wedding celebration. It would have been a indication perceived as, well, he can't provide the wine for the feast. How can he provide for his wife? If he isn't able to have the foresight needed to plan enough provision for this 7-day event, how is he going to have the foresight to plan to provide for his wife and his children for the rest of the life? Right? Mary was going to Christ on behalf of him. She was putting him in that position of bridegroom. Christ saying, it's not my responsibility. My time hasn't come. I'm not the bridegroom yet. Right? I haven't come to inherit my kingdom and to be wed to my bride. And yet we find fulfillment of these scriptures as a shadow of what is to come. Christ provides this wine, and he provides it in abundance. We find that this wine is a blessing from God. I read for you Psalm 104, verse 14 and 15. This is from the NASB. It says, He causes the grass to grow for the cattle and vegetation for the labor of mankind, so that they may produce food from the earth, and wine which makes the human heart cheerful, so that he makes his face gleam with oil, and food which sustains the human heart. We move on very quickly to Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 22 through 26. It reads, Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed that the field brings forth year by year, and thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose to place his name there. The tithe of thy corn, of thy wine, and of thy oil, and the firstlings of thy herds, and of thy flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. And if the way be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it, or if the place be too far from thee, which the Lord thy God shall choose to set his name there, when the Lord thy God has blessed thee, then shalt thou turn it into money, and bind up the money in thy hand, and thou shalt go to the place which the Lord thy God shall choose, and thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thou so lusteth after, for oxen, or for sheep, or for wine, or for strong drink, for whatsoever that thy soul desires, and thou shalt eat there before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice, thou and thy household. We find that these things were given as a blessing from God to make our hearts glad. They were to be partaken of in thankfulness to the Lord. This is a celebration. You can't have a celebration without things to make our hearts glad, right? You can't have a wedding without cake. The cake is half the reason to go to a wedding. We find that these things were given as a blessing from God. And here we find our last point, our last thought for this morning, the water pots. Why were the water pots there to begin with? Let's go back to John chapter 2, verse 6. And there were set there 6 water pots of stone after the manner of purifying the Jews, containing 2 or 3 firkins apiece. These water pots, these stone water pots, were there for cleansing, for purifying. There for the ritual washing of water to make themselves clean before God, before they participated in this ceremony, before they participated in this very ritualistic feasting. This was not just a joining of 2 people together. This was a religious ceremony. And as such, it was mandated by Jewish law that they go about it having cleansed themselves before God. Christ took this picture of ritualistic, continual cleansing that we've already spoken of at length about in weeks past. He took this water, which was a reminder of their uncleanliness before the Lord, and turned it into a symbol of rejoicing, as Christ does for us, as he did in the sacrifice of his blood. He took what was a reminder of our perpetual filthiness before the Lord and turned it into a reminder of his cleansing and of the joy that we have with him, the joy that we have to look forward to in the time when Christ would come to receive his bride, the time when Christ would be the bridegroom had not yet come, and it would not come while he was there. But we see in this miracle performed there at Cana, his glory was declared because he was giving us a picture of what we have to look forward to. A picture of the rejoicing and the feasting that will come when he comes himself as the bridegroom to receive his bride. This wasn't just a time when Jesus did something nice for someone who would have been terribly embarrassed and terribly ashamed had he not been there to do that. This was a time when Christ was pointing forward to the kingdom to come. That's why, as his mother came to him and asked him to provide this wine, he said, My time isn't yet come. It's why he did it anyway. He was giving us something to point at when his time would come, when his hour would be accomplished. For that, I read for you Revelation chapter 19, verse 6 through 9. Give you a moment to turn there. Revelation chapter 19, beginning in verse 6, it says, "And I heard, as it were, the voice of a great multitude, and as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of mighty thundering, saying, Hallelujah, for the Lord God omnipotent reigns. Let us be glad and rejoice and give honor to him, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife has made herself ready. And to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. And he said unto me, Right, blessed are they which are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb. And he said unto me, These are true sayings of God." We find an ultimate marriage described for us here, the penultimate marriage feast. The final one is Christ receives his bride. We see the supper. There won't be a lack for any. Or other places where this feast is described, it's talked about a feast of abundance. As the Lord's enemies have been trampled, as his bride is finally received to him, we find that this is the marriage that we look forward to. This is the marriage that we are required to make ourselves and keep ourselves ready for. It was expected as the bride and the bridegroom betrothed themselves to one another that they would remain faithful to that agreement and to that arrangement. It was a legally binding contract between two parties where the marriage had not yet happened, but it was going to. It was something which required legal action to dissolve. We find that exemplified there in the beginning of Matthew, as Joseph finds out that Mary is pregnant with Christ, and he's looking for a means to put her away or to dissolve this betrothal without completely embarrassing her. Right? We find that this was something that was taken as seriously as the marriages. And so we find in our own betrothal to Christ. It is expected that the wedding will happen. It is expected that the bride and the bridegroom will keep themselves ready and pure for this wedding. The joy of it, the thing that we have to look forward to, the reward, if you will, only begins at the feast. The feast in this wedding was a display of the bridegroom's ability to care for his wife and his family. The feast that we look forward to is a display of the abundance that the Lord has promised. His ability to care for us, not just as his people, but as his people. We labor and we wait, looking forward to. This, I believe, is the reason why John chapter 2 records this specific event for us. Not because we just look at it as, oh yeah, Christ made some wine out of water, how great. But because of what it is pointing to. And that's all I have for you this morning. I hope and I pray that